The great crystal tower floated in the cold darkness of space like a giant diamond catching starlight. Inside this massive structure, 12 different alien races sat around a circular table that could have held a small city. The Galactic Council had been the rulers of known space for over 10,000 years, and today they were very angry. God Ambassador Zethkar stood up from his chair. He was tall and green with scales that shimmered under the bright lights. His yellow eyes looked around the room at all the other aliens. Some looked like giant bugs with many arms and legs. Others were made of what seemed like living gas that moved and changed shape. A few looked like walking crystals that made musical sounds when they moved. Zethkar hit his long metal stick on the floor 3 times. The sound echoed through the chamber. "Silence," he said in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "We are here today to talk about the humans." The word humans made several aliens make disgusted sounds. The bug-like creatures clicked their mandibles angrily. The gas beings swirled faster. Even the crystal people made sharp, unpleasant noises. "These humans have broken our laws," Zethkar continued. "They have taken over 12 star systems without asking permission. They have ignored 43 official warnings. They have built cities on planets without filling out the proper forms. They have even started mining asteroids without paying the required taxes." Queen Vexilla of the Hive Mind raised one of her 6 arms. She was the size of a small car and covered in black chitin that reflected the lights like dark mirrors. "They also sent us a message last week that said thanks but no thanks when we offered to let them join our empire as servants." "Servants," repeated Ambassador Thelanoon of the Gas Collective. His voice sounded like wind through caves. "We were being generous. Most species we simply consume." The crystal being known as prime resonance made a sound like breaking glass. When translated, it meant they also play their music too loud. Zethkar nodded gravely. "All of these crimes cannot go unpunished. The humans think they can do whatever they want just because they are new to space travel. They must learn that the galaxy has rules." He picked up a golden tablet covered in alien writing. "Therefore, the Galactic Council of 12 hereby declares total war upon the species known as humans. We will crush their fleets, destroy their colonies, and make them understand their place in the cosmic order." The other aliens made approving sounds. Some banged the table with their appendages, others flashed bright colors. A few made roaring noises that shook the walls. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy on a small blue planet called Earth, Colonel Jake Morrison was having a very normal Tuesday morning. He sat in a gray metal chair in a gray metal room drinking coffee from a mug that said, "World's Okayest Colonel" on the side. Around the table sat 5 other people in military uniforms, all looking as tired as he felt. "Okay," Jake said, looking at his tablet. "First item on today's agenda is the broken coffee machine on level 3, Lieutenant Amy Price. Did you get that fixed?" Amy was 25 years old with short brown hair and the kind of eager expression that meant she was new to this job. "Yes, sir, the repair guy said it just needed new filters." "Good. Next item, someone from the Mars colonies is complaining about late supply deliveries. Captain Ben Rogers, can you look into that?" Ben was older than Amy but younger than Jake, with the kind of mustache that meant he took himself very seriously. "Already on it, sir." Turns out they were sending their request to the wrong department. Jake was about to move to the next item when his computer made a beeping sound. A message appeared on his screen marked Urgent Galactic Communication. Jake said, clicking on the message. "That's weird. Usually the only galactic communications we get are spam about extended warranties for our spaceships." The message opened and Jake began reading it out loud. "To the inferior species known as humans. You have violated galactic law and ignored our warnings. Therefore, the Galactic Council of 12 hereby declares total war upon your pathetic civilization. You will surrender immediately or face total destruction. Your fleets will be crushed, your worlds will burn, and your people will serve the true rulers of the galaxy for all eternity. This declaration is final and cannot be appealed. Signed, Ambassador Zethkar, Speaker for the Galactic Council." The room went quiet. Amy raised her hand like she was still in school. Sir, should we be worried about this? Jake set down his coffee mug and rubbed his forehead. I mean, probably. Total war sounds pretty serious. He looked at the message again. Although they did call us inferior and pathetic, which seems rude, Captain Rogers leaned forward. Do we even know who these people are? I've never heard of a Galactic Council. Me neither, said Lieutenant Chris Murphy, who handled communications. But the message came through the Deep Space Network, so it's definitely from somewhere out there. Jake picked up his phone. I guess I should call the president and tell him that aliens have declared war on us. Anyone know if he's busy today? Amy checked her tablet. According to his public schedule, he's reviewing agricultural reports this morning. Well, Jake said, standing up and straightening his uniform, I suppose farm reports can wait. This seems more important. He paused at the door. Also, someone should probably tell the news people. They'll want to know about this. As Jake left, to make the most important phone call in human history, the rest of the team sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Amy spoke up. So, should we cancel lunch plans, or do you think this war thing can wait until after we eat? President Rick Coleman was having the kind of morning where everything seemed normal and boring, which was exactly how he liked it. He sat behind the big wooden desk in the Oval Office reading reports about corn production on the Jupiter farming colonies. The numbers were actually quite good this year, and he was making notes about maybe giving the farmers a bonus when his chief of staff burst through the door. Helen Carter was normally a very calm person who never got excited about anything. She had worked in government for 20 years and had seen every kind of crisis imaginable. But today she looked like she had just seen a ghost. Her usually perfect hair was messy, and she was holding a tablet in her shaking hands. Mr. President, she said, trying to catch her breath, we have a situation. A very big situation. Rick looked up from his corn reports and took off his reading glasses. How big are we talking, Helen? Did someone accidentally start another trade war? Because I really don't want to deal with angry ambassadors again today. Helen sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. It's bigger than that, sir. Much bigger. The entire galaxy has declared war on us, Rick blinked slowly. I'm sorry, what did you say? War, Mr. President, aliens from space. They sent us an official declaration of war about an hour ago. Rick put his glasses back on and looked at Helen more carefully. Helen, are you feeling okay? Have you been getting enough sleep? Because what you just said sounds completely crazy. Helen handed him the tablet. I know how it sounds, sir, but Colonel Morrison from Defense Command called me directly. The message came through our deep space communication system. It's real. Rick took the tablet and began reading. His eyebrows went up higher and higher. As he read, when he finished, he set the tablet down and leaned back in his chair. Well, he said after a long pause. This is unexpected. What should we do, sir? Should I call an emergency session of Congress? Should we evacuate the major cities? Should we contact our allies? Rick picked up the tablet again and read the message a second time. They called us inferior and pathetic. That seems unnecessarily mean. He looked up at Helen. Do we know anything about these Galactic Council people? Have we ever talked to them before? Not that I know of, sir. This is the first we've heard from them. Rick stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see people walking around on the White House lawn, completely unaware that aliens had just declared war on their entire species. You know what bothers me most about this message, Helen? What's that, sir? They didn't even try to negotiate first. Usually when someone has a problem with you, they call and complain, maybe send a strongly worded letter. But these aliens went straight to declaring war. That seems like poor conflict resolution skills. Helen stared at him. Mr. President, with all due respect, I don't think this is the time to critique their diplomatic methods. They want to destroy us. True, Rick said, walking back to his desk. But still, it shows bad manners. He sat down and picked up his phone. I should probably call the Pentagon and see what our military people think about all this. While the president was making phone calls, the news of the alien war declaration was spreading across the solar system in the most human way possible. which is to say slowly and with a lot of confusion. On Mars, Governor Paul Mitchell was in the middle of a budget meeting when his secretary handed him a note that said, "Aliens declared war on us." He read it, folded it up, and put it in his pocket. "Where were we?" he asked the room full of accountants and administrators. "Oh yes, the cost of dome maintenance." One of the accountants raised her hand. "Sir, didn't that note say something about war?" Paul shrugged. "Yes, but we're in the middle of budget season. The war will have to wait until we figure out how much we're spending on air filters." On Europa Station, Administrator Kate Williams was reviewing mining reports when the war declaration appeared on her computer screen. She read it while eating a sandwich and then used the printed copy as a coaster for her coffee mug. When her assistant asked about it later, she said, "Oh, that? Yeah, some aliens are mad at us apparently. Could you remind me to read that properly after lunch?" In the asteroid belt, the miners were too busy working to pay much attention to galactic politics. Captain Joe Stevens got the message on his mining ship, but was in the middle of cracking open a particularly valuable asteroid. He glanced at the war declaration and said to his crew, "Hey guys, aliens want to fight us. Anyone worried about that?" His crew looked up from their work for about 5 seconds before going back to what they were doing. "Nah," said his engineer, Lisa Brown. "We've got quotas to meet." Back on Earth, the news media was starting to pick up the story. The first report came from CNN, where anchor Janet Mills was reading the evening news. "Good evening," she said to the camera. "Our top story. Tonight, a celebrity couple is getting divorced after 3 months of marriage. In other news, a new cooking show is breaking rating records. And in what might be considered unusual news, aliens from space have declared war on humanity." She paused and looked directly at the camera. "We go now to our military correspondent, Steve Johnson, for more on this story. Steve, how concerned should Americans be about this alien war declaration?" Steve was standing outside the Pentagon looking completely relaxed. "Well, Janet, I'd say maybe a 3 out of 10 on the concern scale. Our military has handled tough situations before, and aliens probably can't be much tougher than the colonists who rebelled on Mars a few years ago." "Do we know anything about these aliens, Steve?" "Not really, Janet, but Earth's military has been preparing for various threats for decades. I'm sure they have some kind of plan." "Thank you, Steve. We'll continue following this story as it develops." Coming up after the break, we'll show you 5 easy recipes you can make with potatoes. The strangest part of the whole situation was how normal everything seemed. People went to work, children went to school, and life continued exactly as it had before. The stock market dipped for about an hour when the news broke, but recovered. When someone pointed out that aliens probably didn't understand human economics anyway on social media, people were already making jokes about the declaration. Someone created a meme showing a picture of Earth with the caption, "When you're just trying to mind your own business, but the aliens want to start drama." Another popular post said, "Alien invasion checklist, milk, bread, eggs, and maybe some extra batteries for the TV remote." The hashtag Galacticrables started trending within 2 hours of the news breaking. Across the galaxy, the alien races of the Galactic Council began preparing for what they expected would be the shortest war in galactic history. In massive shipyards orbiting dead stars and hidden planets, construction crews worked around the clock to ready their fleets for the coming battle. The reptilian Dominion unveiled their pride and joy, the massive dreadnought ships that had conquered 1,000 worlds. Each ship was the size of a small moon, covered in thick armor plating, and bristling with weapons that could crack planets in half. Admiral Sektar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Unstoppable Death, watching as hundreds of these massive vessels formed into perfect attack formations. "Today we show these humans why the Dominion has ruled this sector for 5,000 years, he announced to his crew. The reptilian warriors hissed their approval, their forked tongues flicking out in anticipation of battle. In the dark reaches of space, the Hive Queens were preparing their own contribution to the war effort. Their bioships were not built in factories but grown in massive organic wombs floating in zero gravity. These living vessels could repair themselves, reproduce during battle, and devour entire asteroid fields for fuel. Queen Zikara watched as her newest batch of destroyer organisms burst from their birthing sacs, already the size of Earth's largest buildings. "My children," she said through the psychic link that connected all hive creatures, "soon you will feast on the flesh of human worlds. Their technology will become part of us, and their resistance will feed our growth." The ethereal collective approached war differently than their physical allies. Being creatures of pure energy, they existed partly in normal space and partly in dimensions that solid beings could barely comprehend. Their ghost ships could phase in and out of reality, appearing inside enemy vessels to attack from within. Archon Veloth gathered his fellow spirits around the nexus point where all dimensions touched. "We have observed these humans for some time," his voice echoed through minds rather than ears. "They are crude, loud, and completely unaware of the higher planes of existence. This war will be less a battle than an education in cosmic insignificance." As the alien fleets gathered their strength, Earth's military command was having what could only be described as a very calm discussion about the end of the world. General Lisa Clark sat at the head of a long table in the Pentagon's main briefing room. Around her sat the leaders of every branch of Earth's military, along with representatives from the Mars Defense Force and the Asteroid Belt Patrol. The room was exactly what you would expect from a military meeting, with gray walls, bad coffee, and fluorescent lights that flickered occasionally. "Okay, everyone," General Clark said, looking at her notes. "Let's review what we know about this war declaration. We've received confirmation that it's genuine and came from something called the Galactic Council. They claim to rule the galaxy and they're unhappy with us for reasons that aren't entirely clear." Colonel Morrison raised his hand. "General, I've been thinking about this, and I have a question. If these aliens rule the galaxy, how come we never heard from them before? We've been exploring space for over a century now." Admiral Tony Baker, who commanded Earth's small space fleet, nodded in agreement. "That's what I was wondering too. You'd think if there was a galactic government, they would have introduced themselves when we first left Earth. It seems rude not to say hello to the new neighbors." General Clark flipped through her briefing papers. "Intelligence thinks they might have been watching us, but decided we weren't important enough to contact officially. Apparently we're what they call a primitive species that they expected would stay on our home planet." Captain Sarah Bennett from the Mars Defense Force laughed. "Well, that was their first mistake. Humans don't really do the staying in one place thing very well." "True," said General Clark. "Which brings us to our current situation. According to the declaration, they plan to send a massive fleet to destroy us completely. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" The room fell silent for a moment. Finally, Admiral Baker spoke up. "Well, we could surrender immediately and hope they're feeling merciful." Everyone looked at him. He shrugged. "I'm just saying it's an option. Probably not a good option, but technically an option." Colonel Morrison shook his head. "I don't think surrendering is really in our nature. Remember what happened when the Mars colonies tried to declare independence? We didn't give up then, and those were our own people." "A good point," said General Clark. "So, if we're not surrendering, what are our military options?" Admiral Baker pulled out his tablet and started reading from it. "Current Earth Defense Fleet consists of 37 patrol ships, 12 heavy cruisers, and 1 experimental battleship that may or may not work properly. The Mars Defense Force has another 15 ships, mostly converted cargo haulers with weapons bolted on. The Belt Patrol has about 20 mining ships that could be armed if necessary." General Clark did some quick math in her head. "So we have maybe 90 ships total, most of them not really designed for serious combat." "That's about right," Admiral Baker confirmed. "Oh, and half our ships are currently scattered across the solar system on routine patrols or supply runs." Captain Bennett leaned forward. "What do we know about their fleet size?" General Clark consulted her notes again. "According to the intelligence analysis of their message, they mentioned the combined might of 12 galactic civilizations and fleets that have conquered 1,000 worlds, so probably a lot more than 90 ships." The room went quiet again. Then Lieutenant Commander Dan Miller, the youngest officer present, raised his hand. General, I have a probably stupid question. Go ahead, Don. Well, if they're so powerful and they've conquered all these worlds, why do they need to declare war on us at all? Why not just show up and take over? General Clark thought about that for a moment. That's actually a very good question. Maybe they have rules about this sort of thing? Admiral Baker laughed. Or maybe they're trying to be polite about it? Excuse us, we're going to destroy your civilization now. Just wanted to give you fair warning. Either way, said General Clark, we need to come up with some kind of response. We can't just sit here and wait for them to arrive. Colonel Morrison raised his hand again. What if we sent them a message back? Try to talk this out like reasonable adults? What would we say? Asked Admiral Baker. Morrison thought for a moment. How about, hey, we didn't know you existed. Sorry if we stepped on your toes. Maybe we can work something out without all the war stuff? General Clark nodded slowly. That's not a terrible idea. Diplomacy first, shooting second. Very civilized. Of us, Captain Bennett grinned. Plus it might confuse them. They probably expect us to either surrender immediately or start threatening them back. A polite response asking for negotiations might throw them off their game. All right, said General Clark, standing up. Here's what we're going to do. Colonel Morrison, I want you to draft a diplomatic response to their war declaration. Keep it polite but firm. Admiral Baker, start getting our ships into some kind of defensive positions around Earth and Mars. Captain Bennett, see if you can convince the asteroid miners to cooperate with us if things get ugly. As the meeting broke up, Lieutenant Commander Miller stayed behind. General, can I ask one more question? Sure, Dan. Do you think we actually have a chance against these aliens? General Clark smiled and patted him on the shoulder. Honestly, Don, I have no idea. But humans have survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and that time someone accidentally launched all our nuclear missiles at the moon. I figure we'll probably survive this too, one way or another. The next few days after the Alien War Declaration could only be described as the most relaxed military mobilization in human history. While the Galactic Council's fleets were racing across space toward Earth with murder in their hearts, humanity was approaching the situation with the same energy most people use to prepare for a mildly inconvenient family reunion. Admiral Tony Baker stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Station looking out at what was supposed to be an intimidating display of human military might. Through the large windows he could see 37 patrol ships, 12 heavy cruisers, and 1 experimental battleship floating in something that was generous to call a formation. It looked more like someone had randomly scattered toy boats. In a bathtub, this is our defensive fleet? Asked Captain Nancy Walsh, his second-in-command. Technically, yes, Admiral Baker replied, sipping coffee from a mug that said, World's Most Adequate Admiral on the side. Although I use the term fleet pretty loosely here. The experimental battleship Constitution floated nearby, and even from a distance they could see crew members working on its hull with what appeared to be ordinary household tools. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Webb had volunteered to captain the ship, mostly because nobody else wanted to deal with all the things that might go wrong with experimental technology. Sir, said Communications Officer Kelly Murphy, I'm getting a message from the Constitution. Lieutenant Commander Webb says the coffee machine is still broken and wants to know if we have any spare parts. Admiral Baker sighed. Tell him, Will. See what we can do. What about the weapon systems? Those are working fine, sir. It's just the coffee machine. Priorities, Admiral Baker muttered. On Mars, Governor Paul Mitchell was dealing with his own version of war preparations. The Mars Defense Force consisted of 15 ships that had originally been cargo haulers before someone decided they looked like they could hold weapons. Captain Sarah Bennett was in charge of making sure they were ready for battle, which mostly involved figuring out which end of the ship the weapons pointed out of. Governor, Captain Bennett said, walking into his office, we've got good news. And bad news about our fleet. Give me the good news first, Paul said, not looking up from his paperwork about potato farming quotas. The good news is all our ships have working engines and most of their weapons are functional. And the bad news? The bad news is that 3 of our ships were built by the lowest bidder. 2 others have crews that have never actually been in a space battle. And 1 ship's captain is currently on vacation and doesn't want to come back early because he already paid for his hotel room. Paul finally looked up from his paperwork. Can we get a replacement, Captain? Already handled, sir. I promoted the ship's cook. He seemed eager for the responsibility. Meanwhile, in the asteroid belt, the miners were having their own discussions about the war. Captain Joe Stevens gathered the leaders of the various mining operations in the bar of Ceres Station, which was basically a metal room with some tables and a machine that dispensed something that was technically alcohol if you didn't ask too many questions about what was in it. So, Joe said, addressing the room full of rough-looking people who spent their lives blowing up rocks in space, aliens want to have a war with us. That's what I heard, said Lisa Brown, who ran the biggest mining operation in the belt. Question is, what are we going to do about it? A miner named Pete Rodriguez raised his hand. Do we have to do anything? I mean, we're way out here in the middle of nowhere. Maybe the aliens won't even notice us. They noticed us enough to declare war, pointed out Captain Stevens. Besides, Earth is where most of our families live. If the aliens destroy Earth, we'll be stuck out here eating nothing but recycled protein bars for the rest of our lives. The room shuddered at that thought. The protein bars were notoriously terrible. So what's the plan? Asked Lisa. Joe stood up and walked to a wall display showing the asteroid belt. We've got about 200 mining ships scattered across the belt. They're not warships, but they're tough, they're fast, and they're loaded with explosives for breaking up asteroids. You want to turn our mining charges into weapons? Asked Pete. Why not? Joe shrugged. An explosion that can crack open a kilometer-wide asteroid should be able to put a decent dent in an alien spaceship. Lisa grinned. I like it. Simple, direct, and we already know how to use the equipment. Back on Earth, the news media was still treating the whole situation like it was an interesting curiosity rather than an existential threat to human civilization. The morning news shows were covering it between weather reports and cooking segments. Good morning. I'm Janet Mills with your Tuesday morning update, said the CNN anchor, smiling brightly at the camera. Our top story today, aliens are still planning to destroy us, but military experts say not to worry too much about it. In other news, a new study shows that eating vegetables is good for you, which surprises absolutely no one. The camera switched to show Steve Johnson standing outside the Pentagon again. Thanks, Janet. I'm here with General Lisa Clark, who's been coordinating Earth's defense preparations. General, how are things going? General Clark looked remarkably calm for someone whose job it was to save human civilization. Things are progressing smoothly, Steve. We're moving our ships into defensive positions and coordinating with our colonial forces on Mars and in the asteroid belt. Are you confident that Earth can defend itself against this alien threat? Well, we've never fought aliens before, so it's hard to say. But humans have always been pretty good at figuring things out as we go along. I'm cautiously optimistic. Any word on when these aliens might actually show up? General Clark checked her watch. Intelligence suggests they'll probably arrive sometime in the next few days. We'll be ready for them. Thank you, General. This has been Steve Johnson reporting from the Pentagon. Back to you, Janet. The camera switched back to the studio where Janet was still smiling. Thank you, Steve. Coming up after the break, we'll show you how to make the perfect omelet using only 3 ingredients. What the news didn't show was the behind the scenes reality of preparing for humanity's first interstellar war. In military bases around the world, soldiers and technicians were working frantically to make sure everything was ready. But they were approaching it with the same practical attitude that humans brought to all their problems. At the main supply depot outside Denver, Sergeant Bill Cooper was trying to figure out how much ammunition they would need for a space battle against an unknown number of alien ships. How do you calculate ammunition needs when you don't know how many enemies you're fighting or what their ships look like? He asked his assistant, Corporal Mary Johnson. I guess we just order a lot and hope it's enough, Mary suggested. Sounds reasonable, Bill said, typing numbers into his computer. Let's order everything we have in stock and see what happens. At the communication center in Colorado Springs, technicians were working on a different problem. How do you talk to aliens who might not speak any human language? We could try basic mathematics, suggested Dr. Alan Mitchell, the head linguist. Mathematical concepts should be universal. Or we could just talk really loud and hope they understand, said communications specialist Tracy Adams. That's what my grandfather always did when he traveled to foreign countries, and it worked for him. Let's try the mathematics first and, save the yelling as a backup plan, Dr. Mitchell decided. The strangest part of the whole preparation process was how normal everything felt. People still went to work, kids still went to school, and life continued pretty much as it always had. The only real change was that the evening news now included updates about alien invasion preparations right between the sports scores and the weather. Forecast. In coffee shops and restaurants around the world, people discussed the upcoming war, with the same casual interest they usually reserved for discussing their favorite television shows. I heard the aliens have ships the size of moons, said one person. That seems excessive, replied their friend. Who needs a spaceship that big? It probably gets terrible fuel economy. Maybe they're compensating for something, suggested a third person, which got a laugh from everyone at the table. This was humanity preparing for its first galactic war, approaching the end of the world with the same practical attitude they used to approach everything else, which is to say with a mixture of careful planning, mild concern, and a lot of shrugging. The Galactic Council's combined fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system on a Thursday morning, which was unfortunate timing because most of the human defense force was still having their morning coffee. The alien armada was everything they had promised it would be and more. Thousands of ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their combined mass so enormous that they actually affected the gravitational field of the outer planets. Admiral Vexthal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Inevitable Conquest, watching as his sensors cataloged the pathetic human defenses. His reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among his people. The human fleet was scattered randomly throughout the system like toys dropped by a careless child. Scan complete, Admiral, reported his tactical officer. We count approximately 90 human vessels total. The largest appears to be roughly equivalent to one of our escort fighters. Vexthal laughed, a sound like grinding stone. 90 ships? This will be over before lunch. Open a communication channel to the human homeworld. I want to offer them one final chance to surrender before we begin the slaughter. On Earth, the communication came through to the Defense Command Center where Colonel Morrison was trying to figure out why the coffee machine was making strange noises. Lieutenant Amy Price answered the incoming call without really paying attention to where it was coming from. Earth Defense Command, this is Lieutenant Price. How can I help you? The voice that responded was deep and menacing, with the kind of echo that suggested it was being translated by a computer. Pathetic humans. This is Admiral Vexthal, of the Galactic Council's Grand Fleet. We have arrived to claim your worlds and destroy your inferior civilization. You have one final opportunity to surrender unconditionally. Amy blinked and looked at her computer screen. Oh, you're the aliens who declared war on us. Hi there, hold on, let me get someone who handles that sort of thing. There was a long pause from the alien end of the communication. Admiral Vexthal had been expecting screaming, begging, or at least some recognition of the enormity of the situation. Instead, he was apparently being put on hold. Amy walked over to Colonel Morrison's desk. Sir, there's an alien admiral on the line who wants to talk about surrendering and destroying our civilization. Should I transfer him to you, or is this more of a General Clark thing? Colonel Morrison looked up from the coffee machine manual. An alien admiral? Oh, right, the war thing. I guess I can talk to him. Transfer it to my desk. A moment later, Colonel Morrison picked up his phone. Hello, this is Colonel Morrison. I understand you're here about the war. I am Admiral Vexthal of the Grand Fleet, the voice boomed. I've come to accept your surrender and begin the destruction of your species. Right, okay, Colonel Morrison said, leaning back in his chair. I have to ask, are you sure you want to do this? Because it seems like kind of a waste of everyone's time. We're really not that important. There was another long pause. In his 3 centuries of military service, Admiral Vextel had never encountered a species that responded to overwhelming force by questioning whether it was worth the effort. You dare to suggest that the might of the Galactic Council is being wasted? Vextel finally managed. I'm not saying it's wasted exactly, Colonel Morrison replied. I'm just saying you brought thousands of ships to fight 90 of ours. It's kind of like using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. Technically it works, but it seems excessive. On his flagship, Admiral Vextel was beginning to feel the first stirrings of confusion. This was not how conquered species were supposed to behave. They should be terrified, desperate, pleading for mercy. Instead, this human seemed to be offering tactical advice. Enough of this foolishness, Vextel declared. You will surrender immediately or face total annihilation. Well, said Colonel Morrison, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think we're going to surrender. Not really our style, you know, but thanks for asking politely. Admiral Vextel closed the communication channel and turned to his tactical officer. Begin the attack. Target their largest vessels first. Meanwhile, aboard the experimental battleship Constitution, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Webb was dealing with his own set of problems. The ship's coffee machine was still broken, the experimental weapon systems made weird humming noises, and his crew of 42 was treating their first interstellar battle like a particularly interesting training exercise. Captain, said his communications officer, Ensign Dave Miller, we're getting reports that the alien fleet has arrived at the edge of the system. How many ships? Ryan asked, not looking up from the technical manual he was reading. Sensors show approximately 3,000 vessels, sir. Ryan nodded absently. That's quite a few. Are they big? Very big, sir. The smallest one is about the size of a city. The largest ones are the size of small moons. Huh, Ryan said finally. Looking up, that seems like overkill. What's our current status? His chief engineer, Lieutenant Sandra Torres, consulted her tablet. All weapon systems are functioning normally. The experimental shield generator is working but making that weird noise again. And the coffee machine is still broken. Priorities, Ryan muttered. Okay, I guess we should probably head toward the aliens and see what happens. Set course for the edge of the system. Should I alert the crew for battle stations, sir? Asked. Ensign Miller. Ryan thought about it for a moment. Nah, let's keep things casual for now. No point in getting everyone worked up until we see what we're dealing with. As the Constitution began moving toward the alien fleet, similar conversations were happening aboard human ships throughout the solar system. The general attitude seemed to be one of mild curiosity mixed with professional duty, like mechanics. Showing up to fix a particularly complicated piece of equipment on Mars, Captain Sarah Bennett was briefing her crew aboard their converted cargo hauler. All right, everyone, the aliens are here, and apparently they want to fight us. Questions? Gunner. Pete Williams raised his hand. Ma'am, did anyone figure out why they're mad at us? Something about violating galactic laws and ignoring their warnings, Sarah replied. Apparently we were supposed to ask permission before colonizing planets. That seems like information they should have shared earlier, commented Navigator. Lisa Chung. Agreed, but here we are. Everyone ready? The crew nodded with the kind of calm professionalism that humans brought to dangerous jobs. They had all signed up for the Mars Defense Force, knowing that it might involve actual defending at some point. In the asteroid belt, the miners were approaching the situation with their usual practical attitude. Captain Joe Stevens gathered his crew aboard their mining ship, the Rockbreaker. Okay, folks, alien warships are heading into the system, and apparently we're at war now. Anyone have any objections to shooting at aliens? His crew, a collection of tough people who spent their lives working in one of the most dangerous environments in the solar system, collectively shrugged. Not particularly, said Engineer Maria Santos. Are we getting paid extra for this? I'll put in a request, Joe promised. In the meantime, let's go see if our mining charges work on alien spaceships. The first actual combat began when a nervous Hive Queen bioship, attempting to perform an intimidating flyby of the Constitution, accidentally fired one of its organic weapons. The blast barely scratched the experimental battleship's shields. But it was technically an act of war, Gunner Mike Taylor, who was 19 years old and had been expecting his first space battle to be more dramatic, reflexively returned fire. His shot, aimed more by instinct than planning, punched straight through the bioship's primary neural cluster, the massive alien vessel, which had been grown specifically for this battle and was the size of a small city, died instantly and began drifting through space. "Oops," Mike said, staring at his targeting screen. "Was I supposed to do that?" Lieutenant Commander Webb looked out the window at the dead alien ship. "Well, it shot at us first. I guess that makes it fair game." On his flagship, Admiral Vexthal watched in disbelief as one of his most powerful bioships was destroyed by what appeared to be a lucky shot from a human vessel that was smaller than his personal shuttle. "How is that possible?" he demanded. "Unknown, Admiral," replied his tactical officer. "The human ship appears to have targeted the bioship's neural cluster with impossible precision." "It had to be luck," Vexthal growled. "Resume the attack. Show these humans what real military power looks like." What followed was the most confusing battle in galactic history, as thousands of massive alien warships tried to engage a human fleet that seemed to treat the entire engagement like an interesting puzzle to solve. What happened next could barely be called a war in any traditional sense. The Galactic Council had prepared for a glorious battle between organized fleets with proper formations, tactical maneuvers, and dignified exchanges of devastating firepower. Instead, they found themselves fighting against what appeared to be a collection of individuals who seemed to be making up their strategy as they went along. The human ships spread out across the solar system in patterns that made no sense to military analysts. They didn't form defensive lines or attempt coordinated attacks. Instead, each ship seemed to be doing its own thing, like a group of people who had shown up to the same party but hadn't actually planned to work together. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Webb aboard the Constitution was discovering that experimental weapon systems had some interesting quirks. When he fired the ship's main cannon at what looked like an important alien vessel, the beam somehow bounced off 3 different asteroids before hitting a completely different ship than the one he had been aiming at. "Did I hit something?" he asked his gunner. Mike Taylor checked his screens. "Yes, sir, but not what you were shooting at. You hit that triangular ship about 50 kilometers to the left." "Is it destroyed?" "It appears to be, sir." "Also, the beam seems to have ricocheted and hit 2 more ships behind it." Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting. Let's try that again and see if we can get more ricochets." Across the battle zone, Captain Sarah Bennett and her converted cargo hauler were having their own adventures. The ship's weapons had originally been designed for breaking up space debris, so they fired projectiles that split into smaller pieces just before impact. This worked surprisingly well against alien ships, which had apparently never encountered weapons that turned into shotgun blasts in space. "Ma'am," reported her gunner, "I think I just shot down 6 ships with 1 blast." "How did you manage that?" Sarah asked. "Well, I aimed at the big one in front, but the projectile split into about 50 pieces and hit everything in a cone-shaped area. The aliens seemed to fly really close together." "Good to know. Keep doing that." In the asteroid belt, the miners were discovering that their mining charges were devastatingly effective against alien warships. Captain Joe Stevens watched as engineer Maria Santos rigged a standard asteroid cracking charge to a drone and sent it flying toward a group of ethereal collective ghost ships. "Those ships can phase in and out of normal space," Joe warned. "They might be hard to hit." "Not if they're solid when the explosion happens," Maria replied. Triggering the charge, the explosion was designed to shatter a kilometer-wide asteroid into manageable chunks. When it went off next to the ethereal ships, it sent shock waves through multiple dimensions simultaneously. The ghost ships, caught between phases, were torn apart by forces they had never encountered before. "Huh?" said Maria, watching the results on her screen. I guess mining charges work in all dimensions. Admiral Vexel was beginning to understand that something had gone very wrong with his perfect plan. His massive dreadnoughts, designed to intimidate enemies with their sheer size, were being picked apart by tiny human ships that seemed to treat the battle like a complicated video game. His bioships, evolved for crushing large fleets, couldn't cope with enemies that scattered in all directions. His ghost ships, which had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, were being destroyed by weapons that shouldn't even be able to touch. Status report, he demanded from his tactical officer. Admiral, we've lost over 400 ships in the last 2 hours. The humans have lost 3 vessels, sir. 3? Vexel's voice cracked slightly. Out of 90 ships, they've only lost 3? Yes, sir. And 2 of those appear to have been accidents. One ship collided with an asteroid while chasing one of our fighters, and another one suffered a reactor malfunction that doesn't seem to be combat-related. Vexel stared at the tactical display showing his mighty fleet being systematically dismantled by what appeared to be a collection of amateurs. How is this possible? The humans fight like they don't know they're supposed to lose, sir. They ignore proper military doctrine completely. Their ships split up randomly, they use weapons in ways they weren't designed for, and they seem to treat the entire engagement as an interesting technical challenge rather than a life-or-death struggle. The final blow came when the asteroid miners decided to try something really ambitious. Captain Joe Stevens gathered 20 mining ships and loaded them with every explosive charge they had available. Instead of using the charges as weapons, they decided to crack open a small asteroid and use the explosion to create a massive debris field right in the middle of the alien formation. This is either going to be brilliant or we're all going to die, Joe announced to his crew as they approached a suitable asteroid. Both sound exciting, replied Maria, arming the charges. The explosion that followed was visible from Earth. The asteroid, which had been roughly spherical and about 2 kilometers across, suddenly became a cloud of fast-moving rocks, ice, and metal that spread out in all directions. The alien ships, flying in their perfect formations, had nowhere to go. Hundreds of massive warships were suddenly trying to dodge millions of pieces of debris moving at incredible speeds. The scene was chaos. Ships that had ruled the galaxy for millennia were being damaged by chunks of rock that had been harmlessly floating in space just minutes before. The perfect formations dissolved as captains desperately tried to maneuver their vessels out of the debris field. Admiral Vexel watched. His flagship's shields flicker and fail as a piece of asteroid the size of a building slammed into his hull. Around him, the bridge crew was frantically trying to coordinate damage control while avoiding the continuing rain of space rocks. Admiral, his communications officer reported, we're receiving surrender requests from over 200 ships. The fleet is requesting permission to withdraw. Vexel looked at the tactical display one more time. His grand fleet, the pride of 12 galactic civilizations, was being defeated by a species that had been in space for barely a century. They weren't losing to superior technology or brilliant strategy. They were losing to pure, chaotic, unpredictable human creativity. Signal the fleet, he said quietly. Full retreat. We're leaving. Should I send a message to the humans, sir? Vexel thought about it for a moment. What could he possibly say? That the mighty Galactic Council had been defeated by a species that treated interstellar war like an interesting hobby project? Tell them we surrender, he said finally, and request that they please stop shooting at us. Back on Earth, President Coleman was eating lunch in the White House cafeteria when his chief of staff found him with the news. Mr. President, the aliens are surrendering. Rick looked up from his sandwich. Already? How long has this war been going on? About 6 hours, sir. That's it? I was expecting this to take at least a few days. He took another bite of his sandwich. Do I need to sign anything? Helen handed him a formal surrender document. The alien admiral sent this. It's very official looking. Rick read through the document while finishing his lunch. They want to formally apologize for the inconvenience and promise never to bother us again. That's nice of them. He signed the paper with the pen from his shirt pocket. There, war's over. What's next on my schedule? You have a meeting about infrastructure spending in an hour, sir. Good, that sounds much more complicated than this. War thing turned out to be. The news of humanity's victory spread across Earth and the colonies with the same casual speed that everything else seemed to happen. People learned about it from the evening news, social media, or conversations with friends. The general reaction was a collective shrug and a feeling that this had all been much less dramatic than expected. The war became a footnote in history. Books, usually mentioned somewhere between the chapter on the Great Potato Shortage of 2387 and the section about the invention of self-heating socks. Military academies would study the battle for decades, trying to understand how proper military doctrine had been defeated by what could only be described as organized chaos. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Webb received a medal for his service, which he accepted politely before asking if anyone had figured out how to fix the Constitution's coffee machine. When reporters asked him about his thoughts on humanity's first interstellar war, he considered the question seriously before answering. It was interesting, I guess. Kind of short, though. I was expecting something more dramatic, like in the movies. But mostly it was just a lot of shooting and technical problems. He paused. Also, we really need better coffee machines on our spaceships. That's probably the most important lesson from all this. And with that, humanity's first galactic war came to an end, leaving everyone involved with the distinct feeling that it had all been much less exciting than anyone had expected. The galaxy learned an important lesson about declaring war on species that approach existential threats with the same energy most people use to deal with a broken appliance. And humans went back to their normal lives with one more story to tell, about the time aliens tried to conquer them and it didn't work out very well.